Thanks, Jeff. Thank you, Don. Thank you, Spark. This is exciting. How many people have had fun so far tonight? Yeah, this is really wonderful stuff. Marketing is the coolest. Hey, how are you? Yeah, this is so much fun coming back. I love ROMI, return on marketing investment. I absolutely get geeked about it, pardon the pun. I actually am a little bit of a geek, not nearly as bad as David Bloom over there, but we're geeks from way back. You know, we enjoy this kind of stuff, and we're going to talk about marketing from both a marketing ROMI, both from a marketing and a geek perspective. You mentioned I'm from Nashville. We just moved to Nashville 2 years ago, and I got to give it, a big yahoo, and really love the city down there. But it's also good to be back here. I'm fortunate I get to commute back and forth. There we go. Button, please. Return on marketing investment. Pretty easy topic until you start to try to do one. The classic Wanamaker. This is really the way to start off any discussion on return on marketing investment. I know half of my advertising budget is wasted. I just don't know which half. In today's world, it's probably anywhere between 70-30 and 30-70. People are trying lots of things. Spending is very fragmented. It's not just half and half. It's like, I don't know what's working at all. And please give us some help. Help us get a little closer to what we're trying to do. Why is return on investment an important topic from a marketing perspective? It provides both the immediate and the longer term returns, and there are two different really time frames to think about it. Marissa, you really nailed this one in particular. It's the long-term benefit about planning, getting it in place, measuring what's working, changing, adapting. It's always trial and error. So the question is, how much can we measure to help us improve the trial? It also helps us focus on results. There's the old saying, what gets measured gets done. If you're not measuring marketing, who knows what you're doing? So one of the best benefits is just the softer side of actually measuring anything so that you get into the rhythm and into the discipline of trying to understand how your dollars are being worked. It gives you the opportunity. I wish we had some CFOs here in the room. Any CFOs? What we love to do is start to pitch investing in marketing versus investing in a new plant. Boy, is that a great discussion. Because in a plant, in an operational investment, you can see exactly what you're going to get. There's a widget at the end. You know, the best return that you can ever make is in marketing when it's done right. I once had a mentor of mine. I was actually working at J. Walter Thompson, and I was peddling advertising, kind of one of the hardest things to sell because you're actually selling nothing but air. And I called my mentor and I said, I got to go make this presentation tomorrow. We're going to pitch this campaign. We have no evidence that it's going to work. We have no clue what we're doing. What do you suggest? And he said, tell them that if it works, it's the best investment they've ever made. And if it doesn't, it's just money down the rat hole. And that's exactly what you're going to do with marketing until you put the discipline in place to give you better information as to what's working and what's not. So the thing that a bean counter likes is that you can take marketing and you can compare that to other opportunities. When you're starting to do that plan, check, act, do, in essence, what you're doing is variance analysis. If you have a plan and you're going to try to do something and you're not achieving that goal, check, change. It provides an extraordinary focus on every dollar you're making. I think, again, you covered this so well. I was actually going to start off by saying, like she said, because there's really not much here that's new in terms of the overall philosophy. Why is it difficult? Well, there are many things that affect the return on marketing investment. Some of them are under your control as a marketer. Very few of them are under your control as a marketing communications person. So you've got a product you're given. What do you got to do with that product? You got to sell it. It doesn't matter what that product is. That's one of those givens. The service delivery, you can't affect that. Customer retention, you can't affect that if you're in communications business. You got to work around those kinds of issues. You've got attributes, you've got pricing, you've got positioning. All of these things are out there, and many times they're givens. So as a marketing communications professional, how do you know what to do to improve that return on, could be garbage. You got to have some measurement in place. The other thing that makes ROI difficult or at least complex is that you've got a lot of external variables. You've got competitive effects, you've got threats, you've got the economic conditions, you've got unemployment rates, you've got, Michigan is going to be different than Tennessee in terms of what the growth rates and what's going on. So there's all these external variables, and they all impact the return on marketing investment. They say that retail is a local business. Marketing is a local business too. You've got to look at certain areas of geography in order to be able to calculate what's really going Most of the time, I like to talk numbers. I like to talk tools and methodologies, and kind of do a little propeller head look at how charts fly through the air. I thought what I'd do is just kind of set up a framework for how to think about tools rather than go through each one. If you on the vertical axis here, I've got situations of relative uncertainty and situations where you're more certain. If you're really certain about what's going on and you're certain your data is good, you can start to do some very fine-grained kind of models or very fine-grained dashboards. Traditional regression analysis is great if you've got great, clean data. Marketing does not usually have great, clean data, so you have to deal with those kinds of issues. And as you get more and more into situations of uncertainty, then you need to do more modeling and more estimation, and it can still be very rigorous, but it's not going to give you a precise answer. One of our folks likes to say, you can be precisely wrong or generally right. Well, in marketing, if you're generally right, you're beating the odds. So what we want to do is try to, most times, what we're trying to do is be generally right and to give people a range of choices where in general they're going to do really well, rather than to be precisely giving them the best choice where they're likely to be as wrong as right. So far, does that make any sense? It's kind of just a weird way of thinking about it. You can't always be right. So let's be close enough. What I'd like to do is kind of talk a little bit about the basic steps that we go through as we're developing and kind of scoping out a ROMI analysis or return on marketing investment analysis. And again, straight out of Marissa's presentation. We should have gotten together and just kind of copied slides. It would have saved us both a lot of work. But it's crystallized goals. If you don't have the objective really well articulated, you'll go on a fishing expedition. You won't have any clue what you really have at the end. We like to develop hypotheses and state them in hypothetical form, statistical 101. Remember the null hypothesis and then H1? Well, a lot of times you can go H0, or the null hypothesis, marketing isn't working. That's a legitimate outcome. Let's test for that. H1, X is going to do Y. In other words, if I spend money on TV, I'm going to generate awareness. Are you going to generate sales? That's probably not a real good hypothesis in a lot of TV types of marketing. So if you start to think about hypothesis, if I spend more money on Twitter, I want to receive what? What's the result you want? And if you start to generate those hypotheses and be very, very specific and articulate about defining them, then you can start to focus the analysis to try to prove or unprove some of these conditions and some of these things you're trying to achieve. After we've done that, then we can determine the required data, because now we know what we're looking for. Until you articulate the hypothesis, all you're going to do is go fishing. But if you articulate the hypothesis, you can identify the data, you can determine the right methodologies, because the methodology you choose really is very dependent on the kind of data that you have. You can gather the data, my geek term for the night, ETL. Extraction, transformation, and loading. I love that one. It just makes me feel like I really know what I'm doing. Fortunately, I don't. Then you can actually conduct the analysis to test for those hypotheses, because you've done that ETL stuff, so you got good data now that's workable. You can construct and evaluate different kinds of models, because you're starting to see effects. If you don't have a hypothesis, you don't know if you have an effect. And if you don't have an effect, then why are you doing the modeling? Because all you're doing is just confirming that you don't know anything at all. So that's, again, why just being very specific about what you're trying to measure is so critical. And then you can start to implement that learning in a lot of different ways. My goal today, in case it wasn't already clear, is to focus on the top two areas. Let's emphasize the importance of a clear statement of goals, as well as the articulation of specific HO, H1, H2, H3. Be very detailed about the hypotheses that you're searching for so that you can get the right data to do that. Again, my goal today is really simple. Let's emphasize setting goals and defining hypotheses. Carhartt, one of our clients in the Dearborn area, outerwear, jacket maker, kind of a quasi fashion, depending on the country and the state and where you happen to live in. Their goal was to determine key factors and their relative weights which are contributing to sales, but they were very clear about the hypotheses that they had. They thought that weather patterns, they sell outerwear jackets, they thought that weather patterns might be the most important variable, and that marketing spend in general, we didn't even look at a media mix, that marketing spend in general was almost insignificant. So there's kind of a mode of thinking that says there's nothing we can do about increasing sales. It's all weather related. When the weather's cold, people buy jackets. When it's not cold, people don't buy jackets. I mean, that makes sense to me. So what we did is defined a set of hypotheses around that. And then that led us to data. So we got out some weather maps and started sucking in a bunch of weather data. Data is great when you're looking at the Weather Service because they're very, very granular. We picked 4 markets to focus on. You can see them in the blue dots there. Geographic dispersed above the Mason-Dixon line, where people actually might have an opportunity to buy coats, at least at some point. And we got precipitation in, I think, 9 different variables, including mean, monthly low, monthly high, how much was snow, how much was rain, temperature graphs, all. I mean, it was really, really cool. This data set took about 16 days to download from the Weather Service, but that's another story. Once we got the data, then we ran through a bunch of fancy-dancy math. This happened to be a Mars analysis for those that are keeping score, multiple adaptive regression splining, in the back after the talk if you want to know more about Mars. And what we're able to do is index the importance of a number of different variables in terms of actually linking or generating to sales. So we're not looking at any other variables. We're not worried about awareness. We're saying what is the driver variables of sales effectiveness. And number 1 was employment. So far, maybe their hypothesis is right. Consumer sentiment is really interesting. Employment is one of those things that people, or unemployment, is one of those things that we put into a lot of models. We rarely see that that's the number 1 driver. Often it's sentiment. It's what people think about the future that dictates their sales, not what's going on today. Average temperature, yahoo! Hypothesis proven. Weather has an effect. It's at 51%, as important as the economy in general, but is definitely a driver effect there in terms of some weather-related variable, and also average precipitation popped in. There were lots of other variables. I'm not showing you the hundreds and hundreds that were at very, very low levels. Marketing spend, 48. So their hypothesis was partially correct. Weather has a stronger impact than marketing spend, but not by much. And it's really the temperature that's a driver rather than precipitation or snowfall. Kind of interesting. So what you can do with that now is you can take some of that data and you can analyze it by market. So what we have are different, what we call elbow points, different changes in how temperature affects sales in different markets. And it turns out the Weather Service is actually pretty good at predicting sales 60 days in advance. So once you know what the impact of temperature is on sales, you can predict your sales effectiveness 60 days out with a pretty good degree of reliability, and they were actually able to start moving their inventory around into different distribution based on weather forecasts. So they were able to reduce the total amount of inventory that was built, move it around to where sales were likely to happen. When they see a weather spike that was generating some potential sales, that's where they began to invest their marketing dollars more effectively. You have interactive effects between these kinds of things. And all of a sudden, you've got a ROMI analysis that's not just measuring what happened in the rearview mirror, but it's actually predicting what's going on in the future. Now, aha! That's eureka. That's exciting stuff. We're not just sitting around counting beans. We're driving businesses. That's ROMI analysis in action. That's cool stuff. You got to give that one a big hand. We also saw very similar importances across different DMAs. We actually ended up extending this analysis into like 16 of their major markets so that they can start to predict and move things around real quickly. Case study number 2, Lincoln Educational Services. Think of them as a post-high school trade school, a lot of automotive engineering. They have nursing programs. They have a number of programs for people that aren't going to go to a 4-year college institution. They have a funnel issue, they thought. They wanted to get more leads into the hopper, and they felt like they had a pretty good ability to generate about 7.5% of leads actually into enrollments. But one of the hypotheses they did mention is just because people enroll doesn't mean that they actually show up. And if they don't show up, they're not going to make that first tuition payment. So they thought they had a problem between the enrollment and what they call starts. Well, you can see that 35% of people don't show up even though they've actually enrolled and been accepted. So that's a revenue opportunity. The question that they had then was, what kind of marketing activities can we do to influence different pieces in that funnel? This is the result of a bunch of math. Stars are the significant variables. The ones in white rows are the significant variables. And what we're seeing is that TV generates a lead at about $142 per lead. So if you want more leads, You spend more money on TV, or you spend more money on outdoor. Turns out that they had billboards near a lot of their campuses, and when they put those billboards up during the fall enrollment kinds of time periods, they were very effective at a very low cost. And there's some things that they didn't need to do. Sorry, no more yellow pages. Event marketing wasn't working very well. Those are negative or non-significant contributors. So with a chart like this, you can start to fine-tune your marketing mix. I'm just going to show you the one for leads. We also did one for for enrollments and one for starts. How do different media work in different conditions? One of the things we then did was took what's called structural equation modeling. It allows you to do path analysis and start to find out and start to look graphically at how different media activity, different marketing activities have a differential impact on different parts of that funnel. There's math behind this. You build a simulator, and guess what? If you have a lead problem, you dial up the lead button. If you have an enrollment problem, you start to put more money into newspaper, more into direct mail, take some money out of here. So there's a real easy map, a real easy path in terms of how to take this data and make it effective going forward to make marketing decisions, not necessarily just how to count what's happened in the past. Again, making it actionable is really, really fun. Goodyear, a client of ours for a long, long time. Their goals, again, were very, very well articulated. They wanted to identify which marketing tactics to use to drive up margin. They have Goodyear has about 15 different major lines of tires and they have a high-end tire like an Eagle. They have low-end tires that are more like in the $40, $50 a corner types of price points. A good Eagle for a Corvette could go for $225, $240 a price point, has a higher margin. So one of the things they wanted to do was say, well, where should we spend our money to drive that margin product up and get people essentially to go through an upsell kind of a condition. And then, as you might expect, they wanted to drive sales. But they wanted to look at a really wide range of tactics. We put together this wonderful analytic plan. And basically, what we're trying to do is model all of the marketing drivers like ad spend and mix, the tire line that was specifically promoted, rebate levels, trade dollars, credit card rebates, spiffs, all the activities that they had on their budget. A lot of times this is a pretty good analysis and a lot of fun to do because you can start to really optimize the entire marketing budget. A lot of inputs. We had a lot of external drivers that or variables we wanted to look at, including gas prices. We had a number of outcome measures. We were looking at both revenue and we had a margin model because they didn't really know the exact margin per tire. So we had to simulate and develop a model to predict. So this is a nice, really fun, complicated, meaty, expensive, a lot of revenue for optimization group kind of a project. I mean, this is one that you actually, when you get done selling this one, you smile and you say, this is going to be fun. Well, pretty quickly into it, we had to rescope the project. Chicken soup. We were throwing way too much into the hopper. We weren't very clear about the specific hypotheses. We were clear about the goals. I'm going to go, maybe I'll go back. Yeah, we were really clear about the goals. We knew exactly what we wanted to do in terms of driving sales, unit sales, and brand mix, that upsell part. But we didn't have any specific hypotheses that we were testing for. So you throw all the tools at it, and you keep churning data, and the computers run, and they get fried, and you got to get a new data center and all that fun stuff, and I'm glad I'm not an IT guy. And all of a sudden, nothing comes out. So they just spent a couple $100,000 on an analysis. What did we learn? Nothing. That's not good for repeat business. So what you do then is rescope the project and say, we're going to do something else for you for free. We got to find you an answer that's actionable, right? And what we did is we defined a set of hypotheses. We actually wrote the questions down. We didn't say we want margin. We said, do rebates work to drive volume? One specific variable, rebates. Do some tire lines demonstrate better response than other tire lines to rebates? So what we actually started to come up with very, very specific hypotheses. We knew the goals. That one we nailed first. But it was the hypotheses to test for. This then focuses the analysis, focuses the data set, focuses the tools that we use, focuses our time in trying to deliver an outcome. Basically, it looked like this. If we spend X dollars on a tire, will we get an increase in tires per day and or an increase in the average line margin? We didn't have to ask the question, what is the margin per tire for each of these 65 different lines. We couldn't get that data. But by looking at average line margin and being very specific about a hypothesis, we were able to really focus the analysis. A couple of great eye charts. Basically, one key thing here is that everything in color is rebates. All of these things that are really important are like consumer sentiment, consumer confidence, ad spending, things that didn't have to do with the rebate. So that kind of was an artifact. And then we were able to look at how different rebate levels per tire impact tires per day, that's the TBD, as well as on average margins. So there's a shorter set of tires to put spiffs on or rebates on to generate margin versus volume. These happen to be, some major tire lines for them. What are they doing with that data? Well, now they're trying to spend an awful lot of money rebating Assurance TS because it's the one that drives the biggest margin up. And there was everything you could do on any tire would drive sales, but it's not a sales game, it's a margin game. We take that data, underneath the hood, there's a simulator, and now they can play what-if games. They can change the price of gas, they can change the consumer sentiment index. All those environmental factors are adaptable to them. They can go 20, 40, 60. They can start to pick tire lines. And at the end, they get a tires per day and an average margin calculation. They can actually do simulations. They can change it depending on what the competition is doing. It's all focused on rebates. We're not looking at the whole plethora of things you can do with marketing. It's a tool that's actually actionable rather than something that's theoretically and intellectually curious. So it's a very action-oriented approach. We think that the stronger analysis, the action-oriented analysis, is very, very clear about the objectives and states the hypotheses that you're starting to analyze for. And when you can do that, you can at least come back and say, well, we know this or we don't. But we're very tight about the analysis because we're really starting to define those hypotheses up front. That was fun. That was really fun. Any specific questions here for Rami? Exciting, Rami? Oh, come on. This is the most fun you've had since the day the hogs ate my little brother. That's one of those new ones I learned down in Tennessee.
So, Jeff, some of the examples you've shown us are fairly big consumer marketers. How does this model scale?
Hypotheses always scale. No matter what data set you're looking at, if you can be very, very tight about the hypothesis, you can start to tease out some information. For example, we're actually starting to do this, as Marissa knows, with HubSpot and being very clear about what our own internal marketing programs are. And we're a small little B2B company.
Okay, but the data is representative. The
data is representative because we're identifying the data we need to address a specific hypothesis that we're stating up front. So it's all about the goals and the hypotheses you're trying to test for. Lots of good questions. This is fun.
Jeff, we talked about the TV spend for Carhartt.
Yeah.
So how do we know whether it was on the right channel, shown at the right time, shown at the right audience, or the commercial was just awful? And how can we quantify that? Because a bad commercial shown at the wrong time to the wrong audience is going to have not the desired effect. So how do we measure whatever that body of work is?
What's your hypothesis?
That spending, they have a TV ad out right now that's just terrific that says, this t-shirt made by Carhartt is not for 90 minutes of tennis in the city. This is for working men. Great theme, but I don't know that I would buy a Carhartt t-shirt, but at least I'm now aware.
So is your hypothesis, this is the consulting part of our job, is your hypothesis that ABC is a better channel environment than NBC? Are you suggesting that perhaps sponsorship and involvement in fishing shows is better than evening news? When you want to get that granular, what you have to do is state the hypothesis in those granular terms and solve each of those issues.
Would I have been better to spend my marketing money on an ad in Outdoor Life magazine or run a TV commercial? That would be my question.
On sales or on some other measure? To Marissa's point, on some other measurement. Once you have that stated, and it's a very specific question you're trying to answer, then we can start to source the data that we need, and it becomes a very clear-cut analysis. I don't have the answer to that question, but
I didn't think it was yes. No, it's TV.
But no, the specific approach, which is be very, very granular about what you're trying to answer and the question on the table, seems to be a really actionable way of moving forward with stuff like that.
Okay. Oh, I got it. Does the hypothesis usually just come from instinct, feeling, your own knowledge about the market, or what?
Oh, that's a great question. We'd love to sell you a bunch of upfront services to show you how you start to generate hypotheses. No, often it's very much marketing and sales sitting down together and saying, what are we trying to accomplish and why do we think this will work? When you frame that as a hypothetical question, then the hypothesis starts to pop right out. So it's why are we doing what we're doing? Well, what do you think? Why do you think we're doing it? That all of a sudden you may have 2 or 3 different hypotheses that come out. Why are we spending money on TV for Carhartt? Well, I don't know. Well, let's generate some hypotheses and start to test for those effects. So it's very much an iterative kind of a process. Marissa.
Just a quick example too. A website, for example, people are always, saying, well, if you're going to charge me, $15,000 for my website, what's the return on my investment? Well, is it for awareness? Is it for leads? Is it for sales? Which is it? Well, we need more sales. Okay, well, how are we going to track how the leads that you're getting through your website are turning into sales? Right? Well, I don't have a CRM. I track all my sales on sticky notes. Well, then that's going to be difficult, right? So it's kind of, you may have a very clear hypothesis, but if you don't have the infrastructure or the mechanism to generate the data, that all of this data, I'm sure came from, billions of, Oracle and all this other stuff. If you don't have any of that, right. So the difficulty when you're a smaller business, you were asking about scale earlier, is, making sure that you're scaling the hypotheses that you're positing to the types of problems that you're solving, and that you are not over-engineering, I guess is the other thing, over-engineering your questions and your infrastructure based on, the size company you are. You can't, as a startup company, you can't do what you're doing, but you can scale that down and do it in a microcosm. So just think, make sure you're not over-engineering, I guess is the point.
A lot of times we'll take that question and we'll do the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle. Where are you spending 80% of your money? Well, let's solve for that first. It doesn't matter what size company you are. You got something you're spending more money on than everything else. Let's focus on measuring that particular goal.
Over here. If you're limited with a small data set, how do you tell if you're confounding your variables? So like for the Lincoln case study, looked like they were doing many different things. If they had a small data set, how do you know that you're not confusing the cause?
Yeah. So a lot of times we think about small data sets as being wide rectangles, limited number of observations, but hundreds of variables that you want to take a look at. So there are tools that are very specific to wide rectangular formats. CART's classification and regression tree analysis is very forgiving for wide rectangles. Another one that we like to use is a random forests. Some pretty sophisticated data mining tools, but that are really resilient to small numbers of observations. For a lot of the kind of RAMI analysis we do, we look for 36 periods, 36 months, which is 3 years of data at a monthly level, and get pretty solid results. The other thing we do is counsel our clients a little bit about what a confidence level really means. If you were going to go to Las Vegas tomorrow, and I told you had a 52% chance of winning every time you rolled the dice, what would you do? You might not play. What if I told you you had an 80% chance of winning every time you rolled? Most people would play. 80% chance every time I'd roll that I'm a winner, that I'm going to more than pay back my money. So if you have an 80% chance of winning, I'm no longer really that concerned if I get to 90 or 95. We're not marketing, we're not in the pharmaceutical business. Our type 1 and type 2 errors are really opposite of what most people think about. Do I have time to talk about type 1, type 2 errors? Yeah, okay. Here's the deal. A type 1 error is an error of commission. If I do something, I'm taking action. I'm committing. In the case of marketing, I'm committing dollars. In the case of a pharmaceutical company, I'm introducing a drug. And if I make a type 1 error as a pharmaceutical company, I should not have introduced that drug. What happens? It means I killed a bunch of people. Bad. In marketing, if I make a type 1 error and I introduce a campaign, what happens if I'm wrong? I wasted some money. I didn't kill a lot of people. Type 2 error, an error of omission. In a pharmaceutical company, if I make a type 2 error, what do? I do nothing. I did not introduce the drug because I was scared. that I might hurt someone. So I didn't introduce the drug. What's the worst case? I just forego $1 billion of profits. Okay, nobody died. But in marketing, if I make a type 2 error, I don't introduce that campaign, what happens? That could have been the one that saved the company. That could have been the big campaign, the home run, the winner. So a type 2 error in marketing is usually more expensive than a type 1 error, which is just the opposite of what they teach everywhere else, and it's just the opposite of what they teach in physical sciences, and just the opposite of the way engineers think. So we have an educational challenge in terms of understanding the type 1 and type 2 errors and setting the tolerances for the type of decision we're specifically make. You do not, TV, you do not need to use the computer defaults. You can set your own parameters for the type of decision you're making. That's important in marketing because we're not in a default business. We're in a creative business. Type 2 errors are more expensive than type 1 errors.
Last question.
So how much time do you take pulling the variables apart and creating independence in the variables? And I ask this because Marissa went through an example where she said maybe somebody gains awareness through the website, then goes to a presentation, and then comes in and maybe spends some one-on-one time with the salesperson. How do you know which one worked?
That's a loaded question. It's never one that works. It's the recipe. Think about baking a cake. You know, you have flour, you have milk, you have eggs, and you have some shortening. You can throw that in under one mix of ingredients, put it in an oven, and you get a cake. Those same ingredients, you can put them in a different recipe, put them on a fry pan, and you get pancakes. Both are good outcomes, but it's the recipe that changes the outcome. What we almost always see, and again, this was not a tool discussion, but we use some tools that look at every combinatorial of every variable and every interaction that's possible. Sometimes it's hundreds of thousands of rows and more columns. And you're starting to look at every single one of those interactions and identify the mix 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 way deep in terms of the combination or the recipe that actually is going to generate those sales. You can't do it manually. You have to have tools to be able to do that on an automatic basis.
Create a subjective approach to an objective analysis? Is that what you're...
No. It's hard science. It's just hard science. It's fun.
All right. Thanks a lot, Jeff. That's great.